What does our single sign-on data tell us about user experience? I'm Andy Anderson. Well, hello. In this session, I'll be talking about what the web analytics we have on our authentication point tells us about the user experience. And at the end, I'll include a bit about what we're doing about the upcoming browser changes you've already heard others talking about. Okay, the web analytics. What can we see? Web analytics captures information about how people interact with our services. Ours aren't concerned with who, only the what. And the only demographic information we collect is that in some places we can see the organization a user is from. We don't need to know your shopping preferences elsewhere. So we had all that stuff turned off when we were using Google Analytics, which we're replacing across the board now with JISC's Matomo instance, which is hosting data in the EU. Now, specifically with the authentication point, the analytics don't actually see 75 to 85% of the user traffic, because when it knows where the user is from, it doesn't, or at least very rarely needs to show it the actual interface, because it just passes the user on to where they need to go. What it does see are the people who do need to sign in, whether or not they can. So it's not all the traffic, but 90,000 users a day or thereabouts is still a very large and very international sample from which we can see trends. That's the background. First up is the hardware and software we see around the world. Now, tables don't work that well in PowerPoint, so I won't make you lean in and stare at one. I'll just highlight a couple of things that we spotted, and it's that mobile platforms are a lot more significant in our emerging markets. Now, as places like Europe and North America are getting up to 10% mobile usage, the Caribbean, Central and Southern America are 20 to 30% mobile users. Africa, 30 to 42% mobile. And Southern, Central and Western Asia are around 20 to 38% mobile. Let's bring those up. Now, this is why, as we continue to expand OpenAthens around the world, we've been designing things like MyAthens to work well on mobile. It's also a factor in our design thinking for administrators, but for the end user interface, it's front and center. The next thing I have for you is a story about how we changed the way people interact with the authentication point. Now, this is what people would see if the authentication point didn't know where they were from. For example, if it was their first ever login or appeared to be. Now, for various reasons, we kept the username and password box on the left until very recently. People who had local authentication would often need to use the box on the right to find their home organization. Now, based on both user feedback and there being more than 8 times as many people using local accounts in the system as OpenAthens accounts, we hypothesized that end users were failing to sign in sometimes because they were entering their local credentials in our own username and password box on the left. And that just wouldn't work. So what we decided to do was take away the left-hand side of the page and show the unknown users just discovery first. The thinking was that even for people who had OpenAthens accounts, there was an advantage in telling the authentication point where they were from, so that they'd be sent to there automatically. They'd be remembered the next time they visited, and they'd see the same version of the login as they would as if they'd been through discovery on a service provider site or followed a waveless URL, that kind of thing. So we decided to change it to this. First thing they see is just look for the name of your institution or organization. Now, before we made the change, we came up with 6 things that we could measure before and after that should tell us if it was a success or failure. Okay, the first one was fewer password failures. The idea was that removing the login form from the initial screen would reduce the number of times that the 80% of people who had local credentials entered them in the wrong place. Well, did it work? Yes, it did. There were 12.5% fewer password failures. There wasn't as much as we'd hoped for, but as we'll come on to, I think the timing of the password strength enforcement may have had an effect. So what I'm going to do is recheck the data in another couple of months to see if there's a bigger change come through. The next thing we looked at was fewer repeated password failures, i.e. not just getting it wrong once, but getting it wrong over and over again. The idea was that because fewer people were going to be getting it wrong in the first place, that number should go down as well. It did. Not as much as we hope, but probably for the same reason. So I'm going to call that one a partial success. The next one is about 0-second visits. Now, if you're familiar with web analytics, you may know that the last page that someone visits has a time on page recorded as 0 seconds, because those analytics don't know where else on your own site the user went to next. And whilst it could mean that the user just gave up without trying, we've, for the purposes of this, assumed it means that they entered the username and password correctly. And for this one, I have to say it was a partial failure, because as you might have guessed, and we didn't realize at the time, if we take away the page where you can enter your credentials immediately when you're not known, if that's gone, there are going to be no 0-second visits, because you have to click something to get to a page where you can get to the page. So partial failure on that one. We learned. Okay, you take away the username and password for the option from the landing page, so user discovery should go up. And discovery should happen earlier in the journey, because they have no choice. Now, by the time the changes were released, the design had evolved to include a link to a generic username and password box. So the numbers didn't go up quite as much as we'd initially expected, but they did go up. A whole 2 percentage points for using discovery at all, and 4 percentage points for doing it first. So a success there. Okay, improvements should make things quicker for the users, but the amounts realized were quite small. Now, ignoring all the sessions over 5 minutes left us with 75% of the data, and the average improvement in that data was about half a second. Now, if we tighten the threshold up to 60 seconds, which is still a pretty long time to be on an authentication point, but won't be someone who's stopped to answer the phone, we still have 55% of the traffic, and a drop in the average time from 15.6 to 15.2 seconds. So I'm gonna hang a flag on that one and say partial success. Excuse me. And the final thing we looked at was shorter visit duration when passwords fail, i.e. if the session included a failed password, overall the session was shorter because they got something right sooner. Now, with this one, it was hard to say if anything changed. A couple of things were a few tenths of a second faster, a couple of things a few tenths longer. I just don't know. With the others, I'm going to look again in a couple of months. Hopefully we'll see some kind of shift, one way or the other. Okay, that was the changes to the authentication point. Now, the last thing I've been tasked to talk about is what we're going to be doing about the browser changes that you've heard some other people talking about already. And there are 3 things that can affect OpenAthens and similar services. Now, the first one of those is, this is probably the main one that people talk about, is third-party cookies and storage. Now, this is the easiest one for browsers to address, and some already default to blocking them. Now, how changes to that are going to affect OpenAthens and similar is actually quite minimal. But the only thing is, if a service provider has used the embedded version of a third-party discovery service, such as our Wayfinder, then that won't remember what users chose at another service provider. And and in some cases, not even the last time they went to that service provider. So they'll have to search for the home organization again. Now, the facility to remember a selection between services is probably gone for good, but updating the widgets to use the SP's own domain for storage should mean resources only have to ask each user once, not every time. Okay, the next one that could affect us is bounce or redirect tracking. And that's mainly going to affect things like social network logins that use OpenID Connect, or OIDC for short. And those things often devolve session management to it. And the way that thing checks the session uses bounce or redirect tracking. There's a project called FedCM, which is aiming to address that, and that's pretty far advanced. But SAML, which is what OpenAthens uses, isn't a part of that. Now, it's possible there will be some impact to the parts of OpenAthens that use OpenID Connect in Keystone, which is one of our publisher products, but that is only going to affect it if the service provider is unable to maintain a user session themselves, which should be unlikely, but we're monitoring the situation on that one to see what, if any, changes we need to make. Don't worry, they're quite easy if we need to. Now, the third one, and this is the biggie because it has the potential to completely break SAML, is link decoration, or as you may know them, parameters. Now, these have been a fundamental part of the URL since it was officially defined back in 1994, and they're fundamental to how SAML works as well at the moment. But because they're fundamental to the URL, any changes to how those work will impact just about every single website and service there is on the planet. And there's going to be a massive amount of thought and discussion around any alternative for that, even before you add in the part about preventing tracking. Now, we're monitoring the situation. The latest news we have on that is that there's a project starting up soon, similar to FedCM, but aimed specifically at SAML. And there'll be some information one way or the other about if that's got any legs in a few months' time. But this one to do with parameters is likely years away from anything happening. Okay, those are the three biggies. And there should be a few minutes left in the session for questions, and hopefully there'll be a live version of me there to answer them. Thank you for listening. Hello, everybody. Just waiting for Lauren to have a check for any questions.
Yeah, I'm just having a look now. If anyone does have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box. Andy's here to answer them if you do have any.
I am aware that the session that I mentioned that would have told you all the stuff about the browser privacy changes that I didn't talk about hasn't happened yet. So sorry about that.
Okay, so we do have a few questions that have come in. We have one from David, which just asks, could you please talk more about what a link decoration is?
Okay, link decoration is just a fancy term for the parameters you sometimes see on the URLs. If you do a Google search, and then go into your address bar at the top, it'll say search, question mark search equals, and then there are some search terms. And there can sometimes be several of those parameters added to a URL. That's all lumped together under the term of link decoration sometimes.
Perfect, thank you. We have another one here from Catherine, which just asks, do you record how many people look for their organization and don't find it?
How many looked at? No, we don't. I can see that a search has happened and that something's happened after that, but you can't really tell the difference between someone searching for something and not finding it because it's not there or because they've entered the wrong terms. For example, if you enter the word university, you're going to get a lot of responses.
That makes sense. We also have one as well, which just says, so with the link declarations, does that impact wafeless URLs?
Oh, yes, it'll impact wafeless URLs, all the ways that SAML works. If they make fundamental changes to that, you won't be able to use search engines, email clients, all kinds of things would break if they just turned off support for link decoration entirely.
Mm-hmm.
The problem they have with it is that the completely normal benign use of it is you can't tell the difference between that and anything unwanted or nefarious.
Rob's asked, where can we learn more about link decoration?
About what it is, there's all kinds of information out there. If you Google the term link decoration, you'll probably find stuff related to this kind of the privacy issues, because this is, I must admit, I'm using the term because of that, because this is the first thing I've heard the term link decoration in connection with stuff. I'd have just called them URL parameters.
We also have another question. What is the most surprising finding from the data?
The most surprising finding was the number of people who go directly to the generic login page and still get it wrong.
Cool. Does anyone else have any questions at the moment? Oh, just one more at the moment. Is when are the changes to link decoration going to go live?
Somewhere in between 2 to 3 years and never. It's a fundamental, but it's going to be a huge amount of work for every single website in the entire planet to change how they interact with the outside world. It's a huge job. I wouldn't worry about it for a long time yet.
Cool, perfect. Doesn't look like we have any more questions at the moment. I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes in case anyone else thinks of something that they would like to ask.
Could we make that 1 minute so I can go get my kid from school?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
So doesn't look like anyone else has any additional questions right now. So yeah, thank you very much, Andy, and we look forward to seeing you all on the next session.
Okay, well, thank you all, and thank you, Lauren. Have a good
Thank
day,
you very
everybody.
much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye now.